Good evening and welcome to the October 4, 2021 Blue Ribbon Passion Review Committee meeting. To help slow the transmission of COVID-19 and protect the health and safety of the community, City Council as well as Board and Commission meetings will continue to be closed to the public for in-person attendance. The public is encouraged to watch and participate from the safety of their homes to practice social distancing. Meetings are broadcast live on Glendale TV, viewable on Spectrum Cable, Channel 6, and AT&T Uverse, Channel 99. Meetings are also streamed live in high definition on the city's webpage, glendaleca.gov/live, or on youtube.com/MyGlendale, and Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire devices using a free app called ScreenWave and choosing Glendale TV from the menu. For public comments and questions during the meeting, please call 818-937-8100. Public comments on a specific agenda item will be taken when that agenda item is discussed. Now, I will conduct roll call. Committee Member Amirian.
Present.
Committee Member Bain.
Present.
Committee Member Kedikian. Committee Member Knights. Committee Member Alex Knights. Committee Member Manning.
Here.
Committee Member Macias.
Here.
Committee Member Michaels.
Present.
Committee Member Molano. Committee Member Nelson. Committee Member Wilson. Committee Member Finch.
Here.
Committee Member Vance.
Here.
Committee Member Jernigan. Committee Member Palos.
Here.
And IBEW representative is not present.
If I can correct one thing, Committee Member Jernigan is actually not on the committee. He was replaced by Ara Zakarian for future roll calls.
Thank you.
He's also not here,
Yes.
for the record.
Thank you. Item number 1 on the agenda, regular business agenda, 1A, report of recorder, posting of the agenda. The agenda for the October 4, 2021 regular meeting of the Blue Ribbon Pension Review Committee was posted on October 1, 2021 on the bulletin board outside the City Hall. Number 2 on the agenda is oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Committee may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. Staff may refer the matter to the appropriate department for investigation and report. And we do not have colors at this time. Item number 3 are the minutes.
With respect to minutes, we don't have minutes yet prepared from our last meeting. We'll have them for the next meeting.
Item number 4 on the agenda, business items. 4A, rules of order and procedures. 4A1, ratify rules of order and procedures.
Great, thank you. So last time we had a robust discussion of the rules of order and procedures. We have sent you procedures that were revised in accordance with the votes of the committee, and we're now at the point where I'm prepared to entertain a motion to adopt the order of procedures.
Before we do, I wonder if we could renumber the rules of order and procedure. Since we no longer have a section 2.2, why don't we renumber 2.3 as 2.2 and then 2.4 as 2.3, so we don't have a gap?
Can we just put this up on the screen so we can take a look at this? That makes perfect sense. We will do that.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts, concerns?
Yes, I have a couple of comments, if I may.
Sure.
I believe that we should maybe postpone this vote for just a couple of minutes and let Susan Wolfson participate. I am particularly, let me add a couple of things, particularly concerned about some of the items, and I hope I'm addressing this correctly. I was wondering if we could establish a kind of like a executive summary to be added to these presentations, maybe like a 3-minute executive summary of whatever the staff plans to present. And the reason why I'm adding this is that from my experience watching City Council and other commission meetings, oftentimes we find presentations that are very wordy, sometimes last 20 minutes or more, and we only have 90 minutes overall assigned to this task. And I think that for us and for the public at large, that we should require a 3-minute executive summary of what is going to be presented in detail soon after that, in case we need to add comments. Besides that, we do get the detailed information ahead of time. So I am kind of concerned that we make our use of time the most effective as possible. And I wanted to add that on item 4.2, there is an indication there that the agenda shall be mailed. And I have concerns about that. Those individuals who wish to receive information, that they would be receiving it via the United States Postal Service mail. If I got this incorrect, please correct me, but I believe that they should probably be sent electronically. I just wanted to add those 2 points for consideration.
Okay. Let's get other comments, and then we can come back to those.
Hi, this is Susan Wolfson. I apologize for the fact that my camera is not working and for being late. I had some technical difficulties and had to come in a different way. But I had, I don't know what has already been said precisely. I thought maybe you could wait for me. I waited last time for a bunch of people to show up. But in section 4.1, I think the last sentence should read, a list will be kept of all proposed agenda items to be incorporated in the minutes of the meetings. I really feel that that wording would be much clearer and would make sure that we meet the objective of keeping track of all of the proposed agenda items. My second remark, and I think that maybe Herbert Milano was just talking about this, is I thought we were going to add a time limit for presentations. We limit the amount of time for the public to speak to us for 5 minutes. Am I on? Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Okay, because something just came up on my screen. We limit the time for the public speakers to 3 minutes. I don't think there's any need for everyone to sit through lengthy presentations where the people are mostly just reading what's already in the agenda packet. I think there should be just a very brief summation, maybe 5 minutes tops. Thank you.
I'm going to take all the comments, and then we'll go through them.
Okay.
Other comments? All right. So let me say, at least from my perspective, the numbering problem, of course, should be fixed. I think where was the reference to mailed? Does anybody remember the exact section number?
4.2.
Okay. Provided to posted for a regular meeting. Sure. Well, the mailed is part of the government code, but we can say something like mailed or emailed or mailed. The problem is the mail. That's what the government code says. It's provided to the committee members. When we say provided, I mean, I think you're most concerned, Ms. Well, whoever mentioned this actually, I guess, over the committee receiving it. And so it certainly could say, instead of provided to the committee members, it could say email to the committee members. How about that?
Mr. Holtzman,
Yes.
if I may. I was not so concerned about my receiving the information. I think the city staff is doing a good job of providing me the information I need. I was concerned that anyone else interested in receiving information, let's say from the news media, for example, an external analyst who wants to view what is being presented. And I just want to make sure that they would have a timely access to the information in case we wish to invite them for a presentation.
So why don't we say emailed or mailed? I think that will. I'm concerned about the Brown Act says mailed. So I'm sorry, the Brown Act. What is the Brown Act? I don't know. That seems okay to me. I don't know, Mike, is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll add the word emailed in front of it, emailed or mailed. As far as executive summary goes, there are going to be some kinds of documents that have executive summaries and others that don't. Much of what you received today, for example, are existing historical documents. And so they're original documents. They're not going to have summaries. I certainly can encourage folks who are doing presentations where we have documents that reflect what their comments are going to be to summarize them. I don't think that necessarily is needed in the rules of procedure, because I just can't guarantee it's going to happen. But I can certainly do my best to encourage folks as your facilitator.
Mr. Olson, the reason why I want to make this particular suggestion is because we may not be the only individuals watching and observing the proceedings of this committee. And I am concerned of other individuals within the city, interested residents and voters who may want to watch and get a synopsis of what is being presented. The idea of creating an executive summary of 3 minutes or 5 minutes is something that I'm very comfortable with in my experience for hundreds of companies for which I've been a consultant. The staff presents an executive summary, and then if needed, we'll go further into it. But at least those individuals who are not apprised of the technology or the terms that are being used or the complexity of it can get a bird's eye view of what is entailed in that discussion. So I'm encouraging it.
Okay. All right. I get the encouragement. And again, you guys get to set your own rules. Let me just say it from my standpoint. I completely agree that a lot of the purpose of this group is to educate the public. I mean, I don't think there's any question that that's true. But I'm concerned that there are documents, for example, the Calpers documents, which you're going to be looking at a little bit tonight, which don't lend themselves to any single summary. There are many, many different aspects of what they say, and they're very detailed.
Can I ask a question, Ms. Holtman? Ms. Milano, are you referring to an executive summary of whatever staff member is presenting the item on the evening of the meeting, or an executive summary of the agenda item, and then each document, or just the item in general? Because I'm trying to get clarification on what it is you're asking.
Well, I'm assuming, Mr. Garcia, that you're addressing it to me since I brought it up. Okay. Yes, I think that for each of the documents that is out there, especially those documents that have a lot of detailed information, I think that a 3-minute summary can be made quite well. In fact, I'd be willing to volunteer to assist in the process if need be. We can always dig deeper into that, but I think an overall view of what transpired is very useful, and it will give a big picture to those individuals who want to know what the overall impact is or has been in the last 20 years, for example, and get that level of understanding, because we are going to be getting into the weeds of this thing, I think, fairly soon from the look of all of these documents. And it could be quite daunting for those individuals who are unfamiliar with the process of the negotiations and the rates and the changes that have transpired. But I think that a 3-minute summary or 5 minutes can be done quite well. And I'm willing to volunteer if your staff needs at least my perception of how it would be done. Thank you.
Okay. Let me also, Ms. Wilson, you'd mentioned before you got to the length of presentations, you had another comment, and I lost your first comment.
Oh, yes, I was commenting on the section 4.1. I believe you added some verbiage to, let's see, where is it here?
It says executive committee will keep minutes listing all agenda items proposed by executive committee members.
Right, and wait, where does it say that? I don't see that wording right here. 4.1, section 4.1.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I think that the list of proposed agenda items should be incorporated in the minutes of all of our meetings, not just executive committee minutes.
Well, the executive, I mean, if it comes up in the executive committee, it would be in executive committee minutes. If it comes up here, it'll be in your minutes.
Okay.
Everybody will get a copy of the executive committee minutes, and if there's anything that they want to raise,
okay,
they can. But obviously, what goes on in the executive committee, it's going to sound a little strange. It stays in the executive committee minutes.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to make sure that we keep it all very open and transparent.
Those will be published on our site, etc. Yes. So on the other issue, on the presentations, I have to tell you, I just completely disagree. This is complicated stuff, and you're going to have a presentation from one of the foremost actuaries in the country, who is very clear spoken and very wonderful educator. That I will be shocked if he does it in under an hour. This is you want to hear, believe me, you want to hear what he thinks about what are opportunities for this group in terms of what to propose, as well as not just what the state of things are, but where we can take this committee. So I would strongly oppose any artificial limitation on the length of time that the people we're bringing here to speak to us speak.
Well, can I ask you a question? As long as this sounds very specific, as if we've already decided who we're having to hear from. Is that correct? Because I don't recall us discussing it at all yet.
We haven't, and sure, it's certainly true that the committee could reject hearing from him, but it's my thought, at least, that we'd be crazy to do that because there's one guy in all of the state of California who really knows this stuff, cold. And you may agree or disagree with him, but he has all of the information at his disposal. And I'm going to strongly recommend that you hear from him. But no, we have not had the conversation yet.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Mr. Holson, just to make sure that I'm being understood, I did not mean to attempt or suggest that the detailed information be limited.
No, that was Ms. Wolfson's. That's not your proposal. That was Ms. Wolfson's proposal. So I'm responding to two different ones. Yours was a summary. Hers was the length of the presentations.
I think Mr. Milano and I are basically on the same page about this. I just object to having the entire agenda report read at a slow pace out loud.
I would agree if that's what was happening. And we're very mindful of the fact
I've seen it happen.
Yeah. Well, I'm look, all I can tell you is I want you to be educated right down to the bottomless pit of the details in this issue so that you can make smart decisions. That's what I want this group to be. So sometimes that's short, sometimes that's long. But I want you guys to have a full understanding of what's here. And I agree that summarizing is good. So I'm not, to be clear, Mr. Milano, I don't disagree with your point. I'm a little concerned about when I think it would have not been very effective as I look at the packet today to add post hoc summaries to that packet, but I do think as to certain types of things, presentations, it makes a lot of sense. So I think I partly agree with you. Let me put it that way. And I certainly understand the idea that we want the public to understand in layman's terms how all of this works as best we can. We want to demystify it, not mystify it. So I think I'm with you in concept, at least, but I just a little concerned about how it works out practically.
And I also want to just comment that I believe that we as committee members should arrive prepared, and we should read our agenda packet thoroughly and study it. I'm certainly not opposed to becoming more educated on the subject. So, thank you.
So what I would propose is that we I'm gonna actually I don't know if I can do this, but I'm gonna suggest a motion, which would be to repair the numbering, to add email to this. I think those are the two changes that at least I'm prepared to support. Obviously, if you guys want to support others, that's fine too.
Yeah, and Mr. Holtzman, if I may.
Yes.
This is Zari Marion. I would actually make that motion to, as proposed, to repair the numbering and to add the language that was specified in that particular section regarding sending out the agenda to whomever may request the agenda.
Thank you. A second?
I'll second.
Can we have a roll call, Mr. Clerk?
Committee Member Amirian,
Yes.
Committee Member Bain,
Yes.
Committee Member Kadikian,
Yes.
Committee Member Knights,
Yes.
Committee Member Manning,
Yes.
Committee Member Macias,
Yes.
Committee Member Michaels,
Yes.
Committee Member Molano,
Yes.
Committee Member Nelson, Committee Member Wolfson,
Yes.
Committee Member Finch,
Yes.
Committee Member Vance,
Yes.
Committee Member Palos,
Yes.
and IBW representative is not present.
Okay. Other motions?
Yes, I'll formalize my motion, Mr. Holtzman,
Sure.
if I may. That on any lengthy presentations that may exceed 5 minutes or more, that there be a summary made as a preface to that introduction.
Is there a second?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the motion. Could you repeat the motion?
Very well. That on any presentation by the city staff that extends beyond 5 minutes, that there be a summary presentation of under 3 minutes or 2 minutes to present a summary introduction to those individuals who are lay persons who may be interested in listening and understanding the top level view of this. Let me rephrase it, it's kind of long. Let me do it again. That on any presentation exceeding 5 minutes, that there be a summary presentation made as a preamble to that presentation. That's the motion.
Second? Is there?
I'll second it.
Okay. Mr. Secretary, if you would call the roll.
May I ask
uh,
a discussion?
Mr. Holtzman?
Sure.
I would like to go ahead and clarify with that motion, who would be making or preparing that summary? If it is a staff presentation, is it the staff that prepared the presentation that is creating the summary? Or you had implied that you volunteer or have another group create that summary?
Mr. Holtzman, I want to clarify that it will be the staff who will be, whoever is making the presentation will make the summary. I only volunteered to give an example of how it would be done on any of these documents. So my objective is to have the city staff or whoever is presenting. If the presentation is long, then there could be a summary similar to the one we find in, for example, in any research paper at any university. You know, there's a summary presented, an abstract, and then the detailed information goes after. That's all I'm asking for.
I could go along with that. Just, I wanted to clarify if there was going to be an alternative presentation to the report. So if it's the same group that is making the presentation is making the summary, I can go along with that.
Yes, that's the intent.
Okay, so let's just be sure we're framing this up right. It would be that to the extent we have a presenter that was giving a presentation, that there will be I assume it's a written and oral summary. Is it both? Are we thinking written or oral?
Oral is sufficient for me, so long as it encapsulates the topic that is being brought up for discussion.
So that presenter would give an oral summary of up to 5 minutes at the beginning of their presentation.
Yes, my intent is to see if maybe 2 minutes or 3 minutes would summarize a lengthy presentation. My objective is if there is a 20-minute presentation by the staff on very detailed information having to do with, let's say, the pension changes in 2011, 2012, that it be encapsulated and summarized in a 2-minute presentation by the staff member, such that when we get into the details, we would have the information.
To be clear, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just trying to nail down the motion. So it's a oral presentation, 2 to 3 minutes prior to the main presentation.
Yes.
Okay, we had a motion and a second. Any other comments before we do a roll call?
Yes. I don't think that I don't think that it's necessary to go into that kind of detail in our procedures. I think that that's something that should be left to whoever is making the presentation, and that if it makes good sense for everybody's understanding to have a summary, then certainly the presenter should do that. But I don't think that we need to mandate that in our procedures. Just my perspective.
Other comments?
Mr. Holtzman, if I may.
Sure.
This is Ari Marion. I agree with Mr. Manning. I feel like the presentations themselves, generally speaking, are encapsulations of the data that's presented to us, any given data that's presented to us on the agenda. And so whether it's staff or some other guest or expert to the committee giving a presentation, I think that's probably, understood that they're going to be taking a large volume of information that's being presented to us in the agenda and encapsulating that in some sort of oral presentation in a way that would, simplify or organize the actual data that's being presented. Generally speaking, in my experience, I don't see exact copies of presentations made in front of committees provided in packets. It's usually information, and then the oral presentation encapsulates what that information is presented. So I feel like we would actually be just adding to the process and really giving redundant instructions to persons that probably have a lot of experience presenting information in that manner anyway. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other comments, I'll ask the secretary to do a roll call vote.
Committee member Amirian?
No.
Committee member Bain?
No.
Committee member Kedian?
No.
Committee member Knight?
No.
Committee member Manning?
No.
Committee member Macias?
No.
Committee member Michaels?
No.
Committee member Molano?
No?
Member Molano?
Yes.
Committee member Nelson? Committee member?
Was that, I'm sorry, you faded out in the last, which committee was it?
Committee member Nelson? Committee Member Wolfson,
Yes.
Committee Member Finch,
No.
Committee Member Vance,
No.
Committee Member Ross,
No.
and IBW representative is not present.
Okay, the motion fails. Are there any other motions before we move to adopt these procedures? Okay, hearing none, we do have to take public comment under the Brown Act on these procedures. Is anybody on the phone?
Mr. Holzman, we do not have any colors at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, can we have then on the procedures as amended, can we have a roll call vote?
I get a motion, a second for that, Mr. Holzman?
Sorry, my bad. Is there a motion to amend to?
Mr. Holtzman,
Yes.
this is Zari Marion, if I may.
Yes.
I move to pass the item as amended regarding the rules of the committee.
Is there a second?
Second.
Sorry. All right. I think that was a second.
I heard a second. I just don't know who it was from.
I think there were several of us. I was one who did.
All right, we'll take you. All right, if we can have a roll call vote.
Yes. Roland Caddy.
Committee Member Amirian,
Yes.
Committee Member Bain,
Yes.
Committee Member Malikian,
Yes.
Committee Member Knights,
Yes. Abstain.
Committee Member Manning,
Yes.
Committee Member Asias,
Yes.
Committee Member Michaels,
Yes.
Committee Member Molano,
Yes.
Committee Member Nelson, Committee Member Wolfson,
Yes.
Committee Member Finch,
Yes.
Committee Member Vance,
Yes.
Committee Member Zakarian, Committee Member Palos,
Yes.
and IBEW representative is not present.
Okay, the motion passes. So we're now on to the selection of the executive committee, and let me tell you how I propose to proceed here. Having given this a little bit of thought, first of all, let me just talk a little bit about what I'm hoping we get from this. Remember that the executive committee has no real formal powers other than really helping steer the agenda, report, and other things like that. And so I think it's going to be very important to the credibility of this committee that it be broadly representative and that it include, knowledgeable members of the committee as well as people who are not involved in, pension issues, but are interested and willing to do the extra work. So I would ask that you consider. I have no authority in this area. Both knowledge and perspective, to the extent that that's known, and so that we have a diverse group. I also I think it's critical that there be labor representation on this committee. There are five, well, there aren't five, but there would be five labor reps here, and so I think it's very important that happen. What I would propose to do, as far as how we proceed, is actually to have individuals volunteer for the committee, and then if we have more than 5 people who volunteer for the committee, that we will then vote on the slate, and those that have the highest plurality number, because it might be a majority, but it may just be a plurality. The 5 who have the highest plurality would be chosen for the committee. This deviates, to be clear, a little bit from Robert's rules, which would require a majority for each individual. But as we thought through the process of how this is going to work, that's pretty unwieldy in a situation where you're choosing all 5. So that's my suggestion, but I'd like to ask for some comments about whether that process is acceptable to folks or whether there are concerns.
Mr. Holtzman, if I may.
Yes, please.
This is Zaria Marion. Would we still be able to nominate individuals?
Sure. Yes, you can nominate individuals or you can nominate yourself. But I want to be clear. It's not like nominating yourself for glory. I want people. I know all of you don't necessarily know each other is the problem. You don't know each other's skills. So to the extent that there are people who are very qualified and very interested, I'd like to hear from them as well. I think that will help because that was my point. But yes, of course. So
may I begin the nominations then?
Well, let me just make sure that everybody's comfortable with this approach. It was really the only way I could really think to make it work. But
excellent, thank you.
All right, hearing no comments, let's go forward. So sure, nominations are open.
Mr. Holtzman, I would like to nominate Mr. Alan Manning.
I second that.
And considering
I'm sorry. I just unmuted myself. I appreciate the nomination, but I think I need to respectfully decline because I'm not going to have the extra time. I'm pushing myself to make time to participate, and I don't think I'll have time to be on a subcommittee. But thank you very much.
Zara, any chance you'll nominate yourself though?
Mr. Holtzman, I will allow somebody else to make that nomination. I do have one other nomination, please.
Okay, sure.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Mike Bain.
Got it. Other nominations.
And I'd appreciate a second on that, please.
I will second that. I would like to nominate Herbert Milano.
I second that.
Other nominations.
Mr. Holtzman? If I may?
Yes, please. Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit. I'm sorry. That's why I'm.
Very well. Thank you.
I think it's Roland who's breaking.
I think Mr. Kadikian is trying to speak.
I just want to add to the members of the committee that I've been following the pension system since roughly 2004. And I've spoken to the city council, even to the changes to the pension system in 2005. So I don't mind going into the weeds, and I do have the time to spend to provide a judicious contribution to the study and the presentation of the issues that are being presented. I'm very much concerned about the city's quality of life, and I'm concerned about a major statement made by Councilman Najarian when this committee was being considered, when he said that it's an existential problem and it's a significant problem to the city of Glendale. And that is my end goal, to make sure that this city is in financially sound basis to go forward and to be able to provide for the quality of life of its residents. So for that reason, I am very much interested in making sure that I provide a positive contribution to the deliberations of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. Kadikian was trying to speak.
Yes, I was trying to nominate Mr. Amirian.
Thank you.
I will second that.
We need at least 2 more nominations. if I feel a little sensitivity interfering in this, but I would like to see a labor representative.
Well, one thing we could do is nominate the IBEW representative who hasn't been to a meeting yet.
That seems like a bad idea. although it'd probably make my job a little easier.
Mr. Holtzman, Mike
yes.
Lenz from GQA.
Yes.
I'd like to nominate Allison Finch from the labor side.
Okay.
I'll second.
Thank you.
And if I may, I like to nominate someone who is not in a representative labor, but Mr. Brian Michaels, I would like to nominate him if he's available and willing.
Like many, I'm concerned about my time, but I will go ahead and serve in lending a bit of a project management background.
Great. Okay, we have 5, but obviously, let's see if there are other nominations.
And just for technical reasons, I'll second Mr. Michael's nominations.
Okay, hearing none, the executive committee will be, make sure I get this right, Mike Bain, Herbert Milano, Zara, gonna work on your last name, sorry.
Okay, Amirian.
Amirian. It's not that hard. I don't know why. Allison Finch and Grant Michaels. All right, thank you. That was great. Okay, so with that, our next item is a
roll call on that, on all the nominations together.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Thank you, Mike. All right. On that slate, Bain, Milano, Amirian, Finch, and Michaels. Do we have a motion?
I move that slate be accepted as the executive committee.
I'll second it.
All right, Mr. Secretary, can we have a roll call vote?
Committee member Amirian,
Yes.
committee member Bain,
Yes.
committee member Kadikian, committee member Knights,
Did you just call Manning?
committee member Manning,
Yes.
committee member Macias,
Yes.
committee member Michaels,
Yes.
committee member Milano,
Yes.
committee member Nelson, committee member Wolfson,
Yes.
committee member Finch,
Yes.
committee member Vance,
Yes.
committee member Zakarian, committee member Palos,
Yes.
and IBW representative is not present. Item 4C under business items, background on Glendale's pension obligations, presentation, and question and answers.
So let me just set this up for a second. We're going to have a presentation today that, as you know, was put together on pretty short notice because we just had our meeting last week. So Michelle and John will be presenting to you. Much of the material in their presentation are materials that council has seen, et cetera, but is an attempt to give you a little bit of an overview of how the city is looking at the overall pension issues. And what I would like is if folks would hold, there are going to be a lot of questions. If they'd hold their questions till the end, I would really appreciate it. I realize that some of the terms, John's going to do his best to kind of start on a more basic level and kind of work his way up a little bit. But I realize that this is just a beginning. Please recognize that there'll be a lot more discussion about these numbers, about all of these issues, and if there are things that need to be clarified, there'll be plenty of opportunity to do that. So with that, I guess I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you, Mr. Holtzman. Let me go ahead and begin sharing the content here on our screen so we can go ahead and get started. See that everybody can see this now. There you go. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'll do my best to try to be brief in my commentary. This was a very lengthy presentation that we made, a similar one in 2015. That is where much of this emanated from. And what we've done is really distilled it down to about 28 slides in total, including some financial information that was asked about up until this point. Before we get into the details of our agenda presentation here today, what we'll be talking about is going to be going over some definitions that'll keep coming up for terms that'll keep coming up throughout the presentation. We'll have a PERS historical background, what the genesis of PERS was and how it made its way into local agencies. We'll talk a little bit about our pre and post PEPRA benefit formulas available to the public agencies. You'll come to find out that PEPRA actually stands for the Public Employee Pension Reform Act of 2013. And prior to 2013, the city was under two different pension systems up until that point. We'll talk about how PERS retirement benefits are calculated for anybody who may not have the detailed knowledge of how that process works. We'll go into some of the pension reform efforts we've tried to tackle in Glendale up until this point, really starting in the early 2000s, but really picking up in the last 7-8 years. We will touch on the hypothetical PERS termination because it is a topic of discussion quite regularly in terms of why not just exit PERS. I will go ahead and preface that bullet point by saying we are not trying to make a case for staying in or coming out of PERS at all. The reason for that is because it is part of the conversation, it is part of the presentation, it is a consideration that should be discussed by this committee at some point when appropriate. That goes to the implications of what happens if you terminate a PERS plan as well. And finally, we'll finish up with the financial data. So real quickly, in terms of definitions, what we have here is a couple of terms that'll come up regularly: miscellaneous and safety. By miscellaneous, we're referring to all city employees who are in the system who are not sworn personnel. That's all of your field operations, your field crews, and general employees. Safety refers to anybody in the police and fire operations. Another couple of terms that come up from time to time is normal cost versus unfunded unfunded accrued liability. The normal cost, let me back up. The city sends a check to PERS on an annual basis for the cost of being in the system. That check is broken down into two separate charges. The first is the normal cost, which is the ongoing expense for being part of the system for that year. The second is to pay down the unfunded accrued liability, or the UAL. That's the portion of the plan where the plan's assets are less than what the accrued liability was. And the whole goal with that is to, at some point, pay off the UAL. Finally, what you'll hear are terms like discount rate and hypothetical termination liability. Those two terms are used interchangeably as we talk about terminating a PERS contract. The discount rate is essentially what PERS would apply to as the long-term rate of return on planned assets when it calculates what the termination cost would be for the city. And the hypothetical termination liability is that. It is just that. It's the estimated financial position if we were to end our plan with PERS. So quickly, PERS, a little bit about PERS history. It was actually established in the 1930s by California voters by amending the Constitution, and it was available to state employees initially. It wasn't PERS, it was actually referred to the State Employee Retirement System. Sometime about a decade later, laws changed and it was extended to public agencies, and about 20 years later, CERS began contracting with about 600 local agencies for retirement benefits. Today, it administers both health and retirement benefits to about 3,000 agencies, about 1.6 million members who are part of about 1.3 of those members are part of the health plans. Glendale is not. Legal authority of PERS actually was established through various different means. It's the fundamental building blocks of this particular system can be found in the California Constitution, the California Code of Government Code, as well as the California Code of Regulations. The board is actually managed by 13 members. They're both elected, appointed, as well as hold office as ex officio members. That composition is mandated by law, and by that we have 6 elected members, 3 appointed members, and 4 ex officio members. That composition can't be changed unless it was approved by a majority of the registered voters within the state of California. So we know we hear PERS quite a bit. We hear about pensions quite a bit, but what actually is PERS? What does PERS actually provide us? It's really important to identify what a pension plan is compared to what in the public sector, compared to what the equivalent is in the private sector. PERS is a defined benefit plan. A 401k, on the other hand, is a defined contribution type plan. In a defined benefit plan, there's a lifetime benefit guaranteed to the employee. That is something that is guaranteed once an employee vests, and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. And a defined contribution plan is essentially a deferred compensation plan like a 401k, where the employee and the employer both will put money into an investment account that will grow over time. And if the investment is handled properly, there will be something left in retirement. If it isn't, there will not be anything left in retirement, left in the account. And if that were to happen, the employer isn't a part of the equation at that point. Calpers, as we discussed, does offer a defined benefit plan to all of our full-time salaried employees. So if you're a full-time salaried employee, you become a member of the Calpers system on your first full day of employment. However, you do not vest. And by that, it means that you don't have a vested right to a pension benefit unless you serve 5 years of employment within the agency or within the system. They could be in different agencies. Hourly employees similarly become part of the plan once they complete about 1,000 hours of employment. However, if you hire an hourly employee and at the time of hire, it's determined that that employee is going to work in excess of 1,000 hours collectively, not within a year, we're required to enroll that employee automatically into PERS at that moment. Retirement benefits are calculated under a defined formula, and that formula takes into consideration 3 primary factors. The first is your service credit. That's the number of years you've worked in the system. The second is your age at retirement. And that's important because depending on whether you retire at one age versus another, your benefit formula would be different. One is lesser than the other. And the final factor to consider is final compensation. We will talk about final compensation in a couple of slides because both are the implementation of Glendale's second tier back in 2011 and the implementation of PEPRA in 2013 modified the way that we calculate our final compensation. Finally, specific retirement formulas, not just in Glendale, but within the industry, are really defined or determined by both the employer, the type of occupation they're in, meaning safety or miscellaneous, and the specific provisions that are between the Calpers and the employer. So at our last meeting, I think there was a request by committee member Milano, if I'm not mistaken, to go back and talk about what happened in 1999 and the early 2000s. And I think by that, what he was referring to was the implementation of SB 400, which was adopted by the state legislature and enacted by Governor Gray Davis in 99. What the implementation of SB 400 did was it changed the way that state employee pensions were handled. It reduced the retirement age for those state employees, so you could retire earlier. It also enhanced the benefit formulas. They implemented richer formulas for those who were working and retiring out of the system. And probably the most criticized component of SB 400 at least looking back, has been the application of new benefit formulas retroactively. What that meant was somebody could have been in the system for 30 years under a lesser formula, but once SB 400 went into effect, it literally applied for the entire duration of their career up until that point and guaranteed them an enhanced retirement benefit. As you can imagine, once SB 400 was passed within a few short years, there was quite a bit of pressure within the industry to expand that to city employees in public agencies as well. No different than when SERS went into effect and ultimately turned into PERS. We talked about that in the first 2 or 3 slides. At that time, of course, there was concern on the part of agencies to go and implement enhanced benefits, but there was an assurance by Calpers that the employer contributions wouldn't increase with benefit enhancements. The reason why there was such a high level of confidence at that point in time because it was in the early 2000s, as you may recall, the .com industry was booming. PERS was making money hand over fist. And for a number of consecutive years, the cities were superfunded. Cities' investment accounts for PERS were superfunded. What that meant was that we were not paying anything to PERS as part of the normal cost. We'll talk about that particular issue when we talk about PEPRA, because that is no longer allowed under one of the provisions in terms of taking a pension holiday. Shortly after the implementation of the enhanced benefit formulas, of course, the economy slowed. I believe in Glendale, and Matt could correct me if I'm wrong, I think we first changed the safety formulas in 2001, and I want to say we changed miscellaneous formulas sometime in 2005, if I'm not mistaken. But right around that point in time, within a year or two, the economy did begin to slow. And ultimately, CalPERS wasn't superfunded anymore. And they needed to make good on the investments and the promises that they had made to the agencies whose employees were part of the system. So they began to implement changes within their own structure and the way that they manage these accounts. Some of the things that they did, and this is just a small handful, we will talk about these in future presentations if the committee decides to. Some of the things they did was they implemented a 15-year smoothing strategy where instead of trying to make up the losses in a year or two, they would amortize it for a 15-year period to try to limit the impact on public agencies. They also decided that they needed to increase the life expectancy, actuarially increase the life expectancy of employees and retirees, because people were living longer and they now had to account for that in the extended period of time that they had to be able to guarantee those pension benefits. And they also reduced the assumed rate of investment return. What that means is they had anticipated making 8+% on their investments in order to make good on their promises. It became abundantly clear that that was a very ambitious rate of return, and they have spent the better part of the last decade plus paring that back little by little, because every 1/10% change in the investment return has a significant impact on an employer's unfunded actuarial liability. When they first began implementing these policies, their whole goal was to smooth the employer rates. They were really trying to limit the impact on on employers. Because employers were not ready for that at that point. That was not something that was anticipated. In fact, they were ensured that this wasn't going to happen, and it did. And their secondary goal was to pay off the unfunded accrued liability over a extended period of time. Ever since the implementation of that initial strategy, PERS has continued to tweak and modify their investment strategies. And what they've essentially done is flip that a little bit on its head. Now their goal, as of a policy that they implemented in 28, they have a new amortization policy that works to pay off the unfunded accrued liability first, so that it could limit the amount of interest that a public agency has to pay over an extended period of time. The second goal really is to smooth the rates for the employer. So as you can see, they're responding more to the long-term needs as opposed to the short-term reaction they did back in about a decade ago. Apologize, I'm just moving some stuff around on my screen so I could see the full screen. Of course, as I mentioned, anything that they do, any small change that PERS makes in their assumptions has a significant rate implication and budgetary impact on local agencies. We know that. We work very closely with them on a regular basis to identify what's going on at their board meetings, what are they proposing, because we have to be prepared for what comes 2 years down the road. But of course, that's not enough. In 2012, Governor Brown at that point in time signed into law Assembly Bill 340, which has come to be known as the Public Employees Pension Reform Act of 2013. That officially went into effect on January 1st, 2013, and is affectionately now known within the industry as PEPRA. PEPRA was and continues to be the most far-reaching effort that we've seen with respect to addressing pension issues in California in the better part of probably 40, 50 years. And it actually came about not with, somebody signing their name on the dotted line. There was quite a bit of discussion that occurred at the state level with elected officials to make this happen. As you can imagine, this was not a popular topic, but a necessary one. So I'll go through some of these provisions very quickly to try to respect your time. But PEPRA essentially had 11 very specific provisions, or I should say very main provisions, to limit the long-term costs associated with pensions within the public sector. The first was just like, I should say, contrary to what happened in '99 and 2001, PEPRA went in to reduce the benefit formulas and increase the age of retirement for new employees prospectively after January 1st of 2013. That created almost two classes of employees. You have your classic employees, those that were hired prior to 2011. In Glendale, we had actually implemented a second tier, which had a reduced retirement formula as well as a 3-year compensation as opposed to single highest year. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then you had PEPRA employees, all employees who are hired into the system after January of 2013. The second provision is that instead of using a single highest year's compensation as the method by which to calculate someone's lifetime pension benefit, the legislature saw it fit to use a 3-year final compensation in order to smooth out any potential attempts at spiking one's salary. So now you have to take your 3 highest years in order to figure out what your pension benefit is going to be. It also incorporated employee cost sharing provisions. What that means is that on the pension side, the employer has the employer's share of pension costs, and then there is a portion that employees are supposed to pay. In many, many cities, up until recently, employees did not pay an employee cost share portion. That was oftentimes picked up by the public agency in addition to the employer's share. Those were active decisions that were made as part of the collective bargaining process. Glendale hasn't been that way. We've actually had employee cost sharing since the 1980s. And we actually began to have our employees picking up a reasonable portion of the employer's share as early as, I want to say, 2001. It wasn't something we had to do at that point. It wasn't legislated, but it was something that we felt was responsible to do before all of this sort of took a turn for the worse. The fourth provision that PEPRA incorporated was compensation cap. A compensation cap essentially establishes a total limit for what will be considered as part of pensionable compensation for PEPRA employees. For agencies who participate in Social Security, or I should say for an employee who participates in Social Security, their total compensation cap is $128,000. And for those who aren't in the Social Security system, their cap can be as high as $156,000. What that means is regardless of what your salary is, in excess of $128,000, even if you're making $200,000 as an example, your pension benefit will be limited. Or I should say your pension benefit compensation limit will be limited at $128,000 for purposes of that calculation, not the 200. Another very popular, I think, provision of PEPRA was the fifth one here, identifying base pension on regularly recurring pay, as opposed to any and all pay that an employee may make. In our industry, there are some employees, we all get a regular recurring rate of pay. That's essentially our normal salary. That's what you'll find in our salary schedules. And we have ranges, 1 through 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, depending on what position you're in. However, there are some positions that might be specialized, that might have certain certifications, and employees may be getting certification pays and additional pay. They might have overtime, for example. They may be cashing out vacation time that they have on the books that they're allowed to a limited extent. These were all methods that at one point in time could have been used to spike one's salary in order to spike one's pension in their final year of working. That went away in PEPRA. That is no longer allowed, very specifically, and it's something that we pay extremely close attention to whenever we're collectively bargaining with our employee unions every few years to make sure that any additional pays aren't pensionable. There was an elimination of replacement benefit plans. What that means is that in certain situations like the one we just talked about, if under the IRS rules, there is a limit to what a public pensioner can make in as part of their public pension. At one point in time, once an employee hit that limit, some agencies had a replacement plan, a replacement benefit plan that would kick in to make up for that difference. That is no longer allowed under PEPRA. Under the PEPRA provisions. There was also a restriction on post-retirement employment, another way of addressing the notion of what was affectionately known as double dipping. That's when somebody works for 25 years, retires, draws a pension, and then goes back to work in the public sector doing nearly what they did previously for a different agency or sometimes the same agency. That's no longer allowed except for extremely limited circumstances, limited scope, limited duration. And in some cases, it needs the executive authority from the governing body. Most often, it's the city council, and it's for positions like city manager or police chief, something where it may be extremely unique. And even in those cases, there is a time restriction. I believe it's either 960 or 980 hours a year. And you do not continue to accrue any additional pension benefits. Finally, there was an elimination of airtime. What that means is that at one point in time, employees could purchase up to 5 years of service credit if they, for example, came into the system late and their pension was going to be not as lucrative as it could have been had they worked in the system for up to an additional 5 years. That is a cost that they would bear entirely on their own. It would be based on their annual compensation and the position they were in at the time the calculation was made. But that has disappeared as an option for any and all employees. No more airtime. We talked about SB 400 and the application of retroactive pension increases or pension benefits. PEPRA eliminated that provision altogether. Any changes to pensions are prospective. You cannot go and enhance a benefit retroactively any longer. We talked very quickly about the elimination of pension holidays. That was when I mentioned that in the early 2000s, we were superfunded and PERS was not requiring normal payments from agencies who were superfunded. That's no longer allowed. We have to continue our normal payments, and the whole purpose there is to continue to actually our normal and our unfunded accrued liability payments. And the whole purpose there is to pay off those liabilities within the amortized schedules that are established. And finally, forfeiture of pension benefits upon felony conviction. Doesn't happen very often, but does from time to time. If you are convicted of a felony in the commissioning of your work, you essentially would forfeit pension benefits starting at the point in which it could be proven that those wrongdoings occurred. Real quickly, a little bit about how the pension system actually works and the different formulas. When we're talking about formulas, what we're really referring to. You'll see these in future presentations, I'm sure. Prior to the passage of PEPRA, agencies were free to choose from a variety of retirement options. And you have those on the left-hand column below. Anything from a 2% at 60 to a 3% at 60 for miscellaneous employees. On the safety side for police and fire, it could be as low as 2 at 55, all the way at 2 at 50. And the second number I'm referring to, the 60, is your age. So if you were to hit age 60, you would get 2% of your salary for every year you worked up until that point. Post-PEPRA, we're very limited in what pension formulas are available out there for our miscellaneous and public safety. On the miscellaneous side, all of our employees are now at 2% at 62. So they have to work until 62 to achieve their maximum benefit. And on our public safety side, you have to work until 57 for 2.7% of your pension benefit. This could be a little bit of a daunting table. I apologize in advance, but I'm going to try to walk you through this carefully but quickly. You have three categories here. You have the green, the red, and the blue. The green are your miscellaneous employees, red is your sworn fire, and blue is your sworn police. In each of these categories, you have three subcategories. You have on your first line all of your miscellaneous employees or your classic member, which is our first tier. That's in the third column. Those are employees who were hired before January 2011, and they're under a 2.5 at 55 formula. Any employees hired after June 1st, 2011, but before June 1st, 2013 are considered classic members still, but they're in our second tier. Remember, this was something we did proactively before PEPRA. And they have a 2% at 55 formula, as well as using 3 years of compensation for the calculation. And finally, you have your PEPRA employees who were hired after January 2013, and they get the 2% at 62. So just by looking at that first three, you see a significant difference in the pension benefits that public employees are afforded, and how that over time is intended to reduce the overall cost of public pensions. I don't necessarily want to go over the other two unless anybody has a burning desire to, but it's exactly the same thing. I'll quickly say that on the fire side, it used to be 3% at 50. Now it's 2.7% at age 57. Identical on the sworn police side, 3% at age 50, 2.7 at 57. Carrying that theme through to our next slide, what we've done is try to illustrate three different types of compensation or PERS benefits for three different types of employees. The first is an accountant retiring at age 55. And in the second example, you're going to see that same accountant retiring at age 62. So what you do is you take, and for the record, we've used $7,045 because that is the top step of that particular position. So we just went with greatest cost scenario here. So in the first row, that's our old classic calculation. For an accountant who worked for 25 years, they retire with a 2.5% benefit factor, and they are guaranteed 62.5% of their compensation. Their compensation being $7,045 means that they will receive a roughly $4,403 maximum benefit if that's the one that they choose to select at the time of retirement. They do have a variety of options of what to do. That same employee, as a PEPRA employee, retiring at age 62 now, worked the same 25 years, except they now have a benefit factor of 2%. That means that they retire with half of their compensation being $7,045. They get a check for $3,522. Carry that through to the firefighter and the police examples below, and you see that whereas the classic formulas would be roughly $7,000. The PEPRA has immediately reduced the monthly expense or monthly burden by $700 for each and every one of those employees. So we've talked about how the state sort of reformed pensions within the industry. I want to take a couple minutes and talk about what reforms looked like in Glendale prior to the passage of PEPRA. We've talked about the second tier quite a bit, and we've talked about how the second tier had the reduced benefit factor as well as the 3-year final compensation provision for new hires. That was one of the things that we were able to do. It wasn't easy, but it had to be negotiated with our employee associations, but it is something we felt we had to do because this was a serious issue at the time and continues to be a serious issue. I will say that it also poses challenges because unless you're dealing with a level playing field within the industry, you're not as attractive an employment option to qualified individuals as some other places. But again, as I said in the beginning, that's not our commentary to try to sway the conversation in one way or another. These are just facts that we deal with on an ongoing basis. We talked a little bit about the next provision, which was the employer contribution, as well as the employee contribution. Until recently, a lot of cities didn't have their employees paying the employee contribution portion. We've done that since the 80s, and it was in 2001 that we actually had our employees pick up a portion of the employer's contribution as well. I'm going to show you a slide probably following this one to illustrate what that actually means. And I will just point out that over the last 7 years, as PERS has modified their investment strategies, those employer contributions have continued to increase. That's really been in direct response to a loss in their investment portfolio. But it's important to note that every time those contributions increase on the employer side, there is a direct impact, a commensurate impact on the employee side, because since our employees are paying a portion of the employer contribution, their share of the employer contribution rises accordingly. And that is a percentage-based system. There is no cap to that. So it just goes up as a matter of percentage. This is the slide that I'm going to spend 2 minutes on and try to get through. It does get sort of complex, so I apologize in advance, but let me give this a shot. What we're trying to illustrate here is how much do our employees actually contribute towards the overall pension cost as a gross percentage of their salary. So again, you'll notice that we have the same 3 tiers of the miscellaneous employees in the first 3 rows. You have your classic miscellaneous employee, your tier 2 miscellaneous employee, and your PEPRA miscellaneous employee. On the 3rd column, the classic employee, the classic miscellaneous, automatically pays 8% of their salary towards the pension costs. So I'm going to use a round number because it's easy to do math that way. Not that every employee makes $100,000, but an employee who makes $100,000, $8,000 is automatically deducted throughout the year for pension expenses. If you go over to the 5th column, the employee cost share of employer contribution, that employee who's already paying 8%, depending on which bargaining unit they're in, whether they're with the IBW, the Glendale City Employee Association, or the Glendale Management Association, is going to pick up somewhere between an additional 3 to 4% of the employer's share. So if you were to combine the 8% employee contribution plus the 3 to 4% employer share, those employees are paying somewhere between 11 and 12% of their gross salary towards the city's overall pension expenses. That number obviously grows as someone's salary grows. You'll see that same pattern go across for our tier 2 employees and our PEPRA employees. What you'll notice is that tier 2 is somewhere between 10 and 11%. I'm looking at the final column now, right here. And the PEPRA employee is somewhere between 9.5% and 10.5%. You might ask yourself, well, if we're talking about pension reform, why are PEPRA employees and tier 2 employees paying less? Shouldn't they be paying more? Realistically, they also have, I think the argument that the legislature would have in that case is that they're also receiving a lesser benefit. So they're paying a commensurate share of what that benefit, that lesser benefit is. So at this point, our classic employees continue to pay the most towards the benefits that were promised to them once they vested in that. On the public safety side, you have your classic and your tier 2. Your classic safety employees are paying somewhere between 12.5% and 13.5% of their gross salary towards pensions. And then the final row over there, we break out PEPRA. PEPRA is handled differently for GFFA as well as for GPOA. GFFA actually pays 15% total first contribution, and the GPOA is at 13.25%. I won't go into the rows down below, but that's intended to show you the percentage of the cost share in addition to the employee contributions that each individual association pays. Aside from some of the things we've talked about, kind of where we've been, some of the things we've tried to do to limit exposure within the employment field, this agency has participated in concession bargaining. That essentially means that we have worked with our associations and had givebacks or impositions of contracts that were not enhanced benefits by any means. In fact, in some cases, were a step backwards, including pay reductions. We've had our associations, a couple of them that were up for cost of living adjustment, as an example, defer negotiated pay increases at times where the financial situation wasn't looking too good for the city. We talked about the implementation of pension concessions, where we implemented a second tier. One of the things we did more recently was the establishment of our IRS Section 115 trust. That is under the IRS code, we're legally able to set up an irrevocable pension trust that can only be used to pay pension obligations, nothing else. We started by putting about $26.5 million into it. I want to say in 2017 or 2018, that has now grown to about $40 million. And that is intended, we'll talk about this again in some future meetings. The city council's policy on that was to accrue those funds because we know that there's years coming in the future where we're going to have some increases, especially on the public safety pension side. And we would use those funds to slowly begin to fill that gap over a 3, 4, 5-year period to ease the burden on the general fund's obligation to pay the debt that it owes. And finally, what we do as a matter of policy and practice now is on an annual basis, we make additional unfunded accrued liability payments. What we'll do is we'll identify all the vacant positions that we had throughout the year. We'll take the amount of money that would have been paid towards the pension system had those employees been in those positions, working and accruing that debt for the city system. And we isolate it and send that to PERS to help pay down our unfunded accrued liability to further reduce the amount of interest that we pay on this debt and have it come to a close much sooner. The last part of my presentation here is the ever-present discussion about Calpers termination. It's certainly a fair question with a difficult answer, but it's something that we absolutely need to face head on. The big question is, can any agency terminate its existing defined benefit plan through Calpers and replace it with a defined contribution or a hybrid type plan? The answer is yes and no. Yes, you can if you decide to switch your entire workforce to a defined contribution plan. That's known as a hard freeze in PERS lingo. However, if the idea is that you would maintain your existing employees in the plan, but at some point develop a new system for prospective employees, new employees who wouldn't be part of the pension system, that is not allowed. Post-PEPRA, soft freezes and hybrids aren't an option. An agency is considered either all in or all out. And if you are all out, then what we have to look at is what the termination cost is. So in this particular slide, what we're looking at is what happens if you decide to be all out. Well, that stops all future service accruals for both your current and future employees. What CalPERS will do is they'll take your existing accrued liability, look at your plan, and come up with a hypothetical termination liability. We say they typically say that it's due in a lump sum payment, but realistically, they realize that coming up with somewhere between 2.4 and 3.7 billion dollars to terminate the liability, depending on what the discount rate that they're going to apply at the time of valuation isn't realistic. So it's likely that they would extend that to a 3-year period of repayment or payment to terminate the liability. But even then, that is a huge nut to crack. What we would be required to do is look at options such as long-term bond financing in order to pay that off, either in a lump sum or over a 3-year period. Those funds we place in a termination trust fund in order to pay the benefits that have been promised to those employees until the day that the last one stops working, retires, and passes away, because it's only at that point that you no longer have an obligation on your hands. And then it's important to note that all employers are actually required to participate in Social Security unless they provide an alternate minimum level of retirement benefits. In Glendale, we are not part of the the Social Security system. We provide a pension system instead. So if we were to eliminate our pension system, we would have to sign up for Social Security, which would add about 12.4% on top of our existing employee expenses. That would, of course, be split evenly between the city as well as the employees. So 6.2% would be picked up by the city and 6.2% would be picked up by the employer. And that brings us into another part of the conversation, because in order to continue to remain competitive, you'd likely have to look at replacing the defined benefit plan with a defined contribution plan like a 401k. And before doing that, obviously, you're going to have to take into consideration the legal, statutory, political, operational implications of doing that. If you were even to look to do that, you would have to have an amendment to the city's charter, collective bargaining, extensive meet and confers with our employee groups, and address the issues of being at a disadvantage in the labor market. I think I end with this particular slide on my part, but I know that this was included in the 2015 report, and I believe you guys have, the committee has been offered an opportunity to review that. I would be remiss not to include at least some commentary on it. But back in 2015, when we performed the analysis of taking everything that we just talked into consideration, eliminating the Calpers termination liability, bond financing to pay off that liability, replacing it with a Social Security and defined contribution plan, the return on investment, if we were to have a 5% 401k defined contribution plan match component, would be about 158 years, and it would rise to about 304 years if we implemented a 10% match plan. Again, I want to stress as plainly as I can, this is not intended to, establish a doom and gloom, impossible scenario. That is not the intent here. But this is just a recap of what was presented. It's out there. We wanted to put it out there for this committee. If it's not something that there's a desire to talk about any longer, so be it. With that, I tried to do that as quickly as I could. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Flynn, our finance director, to take you over the next handful of slides in the next few minutes.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, John, for all that. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Michelle Flynn. I am the finance director here at the City of Glendale. Happy to be here this evening, and I know it's getting late, so I'm going to try to cover the next few slides very concisely for you. To give you some ideas of some of the numbers that we deal with on a daily basis for our pension obligation. And I do have to apologize up front. I just noticed a few minutes ago an error on this one slide. I was trying to update this one at the last minute because we were trying to do the projections on the normal cost component. But basically what I'm going to give you is the numbers for this current fiscal year, which is fiscal year 21-22. The total should be 67 million. So that top line there should be 67 million. Part of that is our normal cost, as John mentioned earlier in the presentation, which is approximately 16.2 million that we're anticipating for the year. Now that is paid to CalPERS every 2 weeks after each of our payroll is finalized. So when I say approximately, it all depends on our payroll. And as you know, we do have vacancies throughout the year. So those numbers can fluctuate. Salaries can change. People leave. We could replace them with somebody at the same classification, but possibly at a lower pay or even a higher pay. So our payroll can fluctuate, obviously. We do have it budgeted, and we do try to anticipate what that number would be. So this is what we've anticipated at this point for this current fiscal year. And then the other piece, the larger piece, as we've talked about, is our UAL, the Unfunded Accrued Liability. That payment for fiscal year 21-22 was already paid. It was paid in July of 21. Again, I forgot to update that date. And that total was 50.8 million. PERS gives us the option to make the UAL payment at each payroll throughout the year, or we can do it in a lump sum. So we opt to do it in a lump sum. After we calculate what those numbers look like, it's a savings to us if we can pay that upfront in July. And this year's savings was about $1.8 million, and that is gross, not net of any interest that we could have earned if we kept that money in our treasury invested with our portfolio. But that's basically the gross number of 1.8 million. So the way we look at that is it is worth it. It does save the city some money to be able to pay that off in a lump sum, because we're going to have to pay it anyways. We just do it all in July. Don, can you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. So looking at some of the history of our CalPERS payments, we went back a few years here for 2017-18 all the way through our estimate for 21-22. You can see the different pieces, the normal cost, the UAL, and then the third piece, that purple spot, is the employee cost share of the employer's portion. John talked a lot about employee portion. So the employee pays their share, that goes directly out of their paycheck to PERS. And this piece, that purple piece, is the portion that they pay for the city's cost. These numbers are all reported annually in our annual financial statements. So you can see our 21-22 number. The total there is going to be 61.2 million plus the 5.8 million for our cost share from our employees. And then you see how the UAL, that middle blue piece or teal piece, increases the most, obviously. And part of the reason for that, there's a lot of reasons for it. The main reason, or one of the reasons I should say, is that during this time period is when CalPERS changed their target investment rate of return. They've been trying to, John mentioned way back, they had a portfolio, they were trying to earn 8% or a little over 8%. That has slowly dropped. It was 7.5% for quite some time. And in 2018, they implemented every year they were dropping it a little bit. So we went from 7.5 to 7.375 in fiscal year 18-19. Then in fiscal year 19-20, down to 7.25, and then 7%. They just earned quite a bit on their portfolio, and we'll look at their earnings in a couple slides. And that target rate of return is actually going to drop again, because that's another part of their strategy. So every time they try to get they lower that discount rate, it causes our contribution to rise. John, can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So just looking at some projections and what this means going forward, we use these numbers. These come right out of our annual PERS reports that they provide to us every summer. We use them in our budgeting, in our 5-year forecast projections in the general fund, as well as the other funds that we have to look at and make sure that they all stay healthy. We look at the unfunded liability as well as the normal costs. And you can see that first part of the chart down below is the safety plan. The second part is the miscellaneous plan. The total rate includes the normal cost as well as the UAL payment. The UAL payment they give us in a lump sum dollar. We have to convert that into a rate so that we can do it correctly through payroll. So you can see for 21-22, total rate for safety plan is 62.76 and miscellaneous is 38.69. And going out in our projections out to fiscal year 27-28, we go up to 67% for safety and 36.8% for miscellaneous. So it does fluctuate. That is, we will get into more discussions at another meeting on kind of how this all comes together in different amortization tiers that PERS does. It's kind of like paying off a mortgage if you had it layered in different spots because of different investment earnings and everything that causes those tiers to occur. So our we're hoping that in a subsequent presentation we'll be able to get a little bit more information and dive into that a little bit more for you. Okay, next slide. This is our net pension liability numbers. For safety in blue, miscellaneous in red. Fiscal year 2021, our most current fiscal year, we're just preparing the financial statements for right now. Total liability for combined both plans is going to be $640 million. That's up from about $600 million in 1920, so last fiscal year. So this is the difference between our plan assets that we have with PERS and our liability. So our liabilities exceed the assets by these numbers. And then the last slide is our just a quick shot of Calpers investment returns this last 10 years. This past year, so June of 2021, Calpers earned 21.3%. So they had a really good year. And you can see that red line kind of down the middle there. That's the target rate of return or their discount rate that they try to achieve on their portfolio. And you can see how it was over in the earlier years on this chart. 7.75 is what I talked about. We were at 7.5 for a while, and then they dropped it. That's the target that they're trying to achieve. And you can see it fluctuates. It goes up and down, just like the stock market, right? Pretty much like probably our 457 plans, and those of you who have any other deferred comps, it works very similar. But it's important to note that in the pension world, they look at long-term, and CalPERS on their website will publish, everything from like 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, all the way up to 30-year average rate of return on their portfolio. And last year, and I don't have the current numbers in front of me, but as of last year, their 10-year average rate of return was 8.5%. And their 20-year was 5.5, and their 30-year was 8%. So they're lowering their discount rate to a more reasonable level so that they can try to achieve that on long term and average that out for the employers on a long-term basis. So I think that is my last slide, and I know I had a teeny part compared to John, but I'm going to turn it over to John Holtzman and see where you want to go at this point.
Sure.
We probably have some questions we want to field.
So, well, here's what I think, because the hour is late, but I feel like we should take some questions now. Obviously, city staff isn't going anywhere. We are going to have lots of opportunities to dig deeper into all of this. But so my plan for the rest of the evening is we can go a little longer. I know we've held everybody already longer than we should have, but maybe another 15 minutes, and then we will put off the Brown Act presentation yet again to another meeting.
Excuse me, Mr. Holson. May I say a few things?
This is the time.
All right. First of all, I want to thank city staff for their presentation, and I appreciate everything that they said. A great deal of it was in our packet. However, I just want to say, I think I want to speak to the point about Social Security. I just want to discuss that because it's kind of the granddaddy of governmentally funded defined benefit pension plans. And many people in the public depend on Social Security for their pensions. And you have to understand how these people view these discussions. There's never any question but that the employee will pay their 6.2% of their wages into Social Security system. The employer never pays that for them, not any of it. And that's their $6,200 on $100,000 of gross wages. The maximum Social Security benefit is $3,895 a month. That's the absolute top that anyone could get. And they would have to wait until they're 70 to get that. And they would have to have been earning somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000 for a substantial period of time as their wages. So I only mention these basic facts so that you can understand how members of the public may view the discussion of government pensions. I'm not saying that to attack. I just want to make that really clear from the outset. So that's a comment more than a question. My second point that I want to make is a question, however. We're relying a great deal on the idea that PEPRA will somehow have an impact on the continuing liability accrual. But one thing that never seems to be in the presentations or in the documentation is what is the proportion of our current workforce that are PEPRA employees as opposed to Classic Tier 1 and Classic Tier 2. I think that as a point would be very helpful because an allusion was made earlier to the Calpers compensation limit, which indeed is for a non-Social Security participant, $153,671 for 2021. However, for the Classic members, 2021, that compensation limit is $290,000. So that's a pretty substantial difference. And in order for us to turn this large yacht around, we need to know how is that going to play out. And I think some quantification of that would be very helpful for this committee. My third question is, I wanted to ask, does the city currently offer its employees the option of deferred compensation in a 457 plan? That's I think a reasonable question to ask. It's something that a lot of other agencies do provide, and I've often wondered if that's something that our city offers to its employees already. Fourth, I find the returns on investment by Calpers to be not terribly satisfactory. I mean, I have to tell you, I watch the market quite a bit. And I think we need to make, I wonder if all the agencies that are members could be maybe applying some pressure to Calpers because it is causing a great deal of budgetary pain for agencies to have to deal with these reduced computations. And the final thing I wanted to say on your presentation, Ms. Flynn, slide 26 showed a history of our liability. I noticed as it was flashing before our eyes that during 2015 to 16, it was about $460 million, And now in 2019 to 2020, 640 million. So that's a huge growth. So that's why it concerns me. What is the impact of PEPRA? Because we're not seeing a lot of progress yet. And maybe that's something, and, I'm hoping maybe with some proportional information about how that proportion of employees may be changing, that composition of employees, that may have an impact on the discussion. So anyhow, I'm sorry if I went on too long. Thank you.
Oh, those are terrific questions. I don't know if we're going to get to them all tonight, but we might have a couple of the answers, like the percent of pepper. So, John or
Yes, I can definitely handle that. The percentage of our PEPRA folks are actually in our actuarial report that we receive every year from our actuary. So for the miscellaneous plan, as of last year, we haven't gotten the one for this year yet. Last year's number is 43% of our workforce is in PEPRA for our miscellaneous plan. And under safety, it is lower. It's 19%. That is a function of just the longevity that we have in safety compared to our miscellaneous group. So 43% and 19% for PEPRA. And I think the other question that I heard or comment was regarding
457 plan.
the 457, and if we do offer that, that is current. There's currently a 457 plan that employees can join, and then management level can join a 401 plan, which is an irrevocable election at the time they are eligible to join that. So we do offer both of those plans currently to our employees. There is no employer match on either.
Thank you. And just one other thing I wanted to say, because it was mentioned earlier about staying competitive. I wanted to throw this in. I made a note of it and then I forgot to say it. In my opinion, the quality of our staff at the city is so wonderful. We're obviously holding our own in the marketplace. So I don't think we need to worry as much about that maybe as we do. Thanks.
I do also want to just add a comment regarding Ms. Wolfson's comment regarding the PEPRA when folks come in. So our actuary also does longer term projections for us, utilizing the information that comes out of Calpers, and they actually go out 40 years in their projection of our rates. So around fiscal year 30, 31, 32, in that range, we start to see our rates drop. And when they start to drop, they continually drop. And that is when the anticipation of PEPRA folks are starting to be more in the system than the classic folks. So that is within about 9 to 10 years from now, we start seeing that drop happen and continue to happen going out. And that is for both miscellaneous as well as the safety plan.
And let me just also say, one of the things that we'll probably talk about quite a bit is the unfunded liability that you have, that you've generated, is essentially a dollar, a dollar number, and you're paying interest on that amount, but essentially at the discount rate. Which so the underlying problem, the reason why the numbers are getting essentially worse, not better, is in part because unless CalPERS makes its returns of at this point 7% or better, but before it was higher than that, then you're actually losing ground. It's like, so the problem is you've got this giant lump sum of money that you basically owe, and it just isn't really going away very quickly.
Mr. Holson?
Yes.
Server Milano speaking. As I listened to the presentation, I tried to assess that information with what other information that I've gotten in the past. So I would like to present this as a way to have the staff validate my impressions. In the year 2001, the city of Glendale approved in the month of April the change, which we now know is 3% at 50 for our safety personnel. That means that any employee retiring at the age of 50, having served 30 years, somebody who started at 20, retired at 50, could get 90% of his latest salary, adjusted for inflation, for life.
That's
The
correct.
impact was also augmented by the number of current then employees or who had already vested close to 30 years. And all of them basically would be getting that instantly. Years back, I did a rough estimate of how many millions of dollars that was, but it was in the hundreds of millions of dollars instantly on that day. What does it mean to us when we find that Calpers took the latest rosy indicators of the stock market, the bubble that everybody knew, and then applied that as if it were going to last forever? So we know now from this report that in the last 20 years, the average return is 5.5%, right, on those investments. Not the 8, that's a 33% error. And it's an error that is pretty significant for an agency of this scope and this size. I was looking at the trends in returns just for the last year, which was a banner year for everybody. And Glendale, and the pension system for Calpers was rated 34 out of 36. It is that bad. The 20+% increase, almost 21% return, does not even compare to cities surrounding states where they have actually had a significant improvement with regard to that return. So Calpers needs to be looked at as an agency on which we are depending on making those returns, because if they don't make those returns, it is the taxpayer who has to make up that money. So how much does it cost? Well, every single week we go in the hole $760,000 every week. It's an astonishing number. Every single week. What does it mean, this unfunded obligation for the residents of Glendale? We have 75,000 homes. It means that $8,520 is the amount owed by every household towards that debt. And if we were to consider removing Calpers as the entity for our retirement and pay it off, each household would have to come up with $37,000, each one, every apartment, every house, every family. When you look at the scope of this problem on the numerical side, you wonder how in the world did anyone not be able to address a future cost based upon the history of the stock market? Now we have 20 solid years of history. The other problem that I see with the PEPRA that they try to address, not the problem with PEPRA, but the problems they recognize, was the abuses of the pension system, with what was mentioned several times by Mr. Catalian, spiking the salaries such that they would maximize to the limit how much they would get in pension obligation. In other words, we have a moral issue that this debt that the residents have to pay, that the city is actually turned into significant deficits in the goals of the city. And it is my suggestion that we maybe reframe this in the future. How has this debt, this accumulated obligation, impacted the residents of Glendale in terms of the infrastructure that it doesn't get done, in terms of the services that it cannot provide, in terms of the parkland that it cannot? There is a real tangible, direct impact to the residents of Glendale. If we make this solely an issue of figuring out how to solve the obligation only within the scope of the pension system, we are not addressing the purpose of a city, which is to serve and improve the quality of life of its residents. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
I'd like to make one comment on, there's a lot of talk about the unfunded accrued liability, but underneath of that is the basic accrued liability, which, if I understand some of the material that was sent out, it's a little over $1 billion. When they change the interest rate from 7.5% to 7%, that's the number that increases, not the unfunded. The unfunded is a consequence. So when you cut your interest rate by 0.5% to get closer to alignment with reality, they are in effect raising that accrued liability by, probably well over 0.5%, probably adding closer to $100 million to the liability, offset by the same asset figure that they had before. So these increases that we see when we look at this historically has a significant part of it tied directly to the interest assumption changes that they've been lowering from 8% that it was a decade or two ago, gradually down to something that is more closely aligned with actual rates of return.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, by the way, let me just elaborate on that just a tiny bit. It's a real conundrum because you actually, in some ways, want CalPERS to be lowering the discount rate to a level they can hit. But when you lower the discount rate, it increases the unfunded liability. So it's a little bit of a conundrum that CalPERS has been trying to navigate.
But better to have the two in alignment than to have a constantly increasing unfunded number that you do not anticipate and expect that number is going to grow into, unmanageable levels.
Other questions? All right. So what I'd like to do is schedule, I think, an XCOM meeting. I think we're supposed to do it on the off Mondays anyway, and use that to develop the agenda for this coming meeting. In the future, I'm going to have everybody comment on ideas for the agenda, but I think given the hour that, at least for next week, for 2 weeks from now, there are a number of things that I think everybody could agree are going to be useful, and so we're not at the point where we need to do that here, but we'll do that in 2 weeks. So in the meantime, if we can schedule the executive committee, we'll all reach out to you to see what works for time. I'm hoping we can, keep that to maybe an hour because I understand the drain on everybody's time. All right. Any parting comments, or are we ready for a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Mr.
We're
Secretary.
adjourned at 8:32 p.m.